There is a company you have almost certainly given money to this year. You may not know its name. You may have given it to a brand that did not exist 100 years ago, wearing a logo that has been redrawn 4 times at a pump on a road you drive without thinking. And that money went, in the end, into a shape that one man drew on paper in Cleveland, Ohio in 1870. Here is what makes tonight's story worth 30 minutes of your life. You have been told, probably more than once, that John D. Rockefeller was the richest man of his age because he crushed his rivals. That is true. It is also the least interesting true thing about him. Because the thing he actually built was not an oil company, it was a mechanism, a way of turning other people's weakness into your own cost advantage, over and over, until competing with you stopped being a business decision and became a kind of arithmetic that nobody else could win. And then the highest court in the United States looked at that mechanism and ordered it destroyed. Stay with me for the part almost nobody tells you. The breakup worked. The court got what it asked for. The machine was cut apart into more than 30 separate companies, and John D. Rockefeller walked out of the wreckage richer than he had ever been in his life. Not because he cheated the ruling, because of what the ruling did to the price of the pieces. By the end of this episode, you will understand 3 things you can carry with you. How the machine actually worked, the specific trick, not the myth. Why the men who tried to stop it kept failing for 40 years. And why breaking a monopoly and ending a fortune turn out to be 2 completely different problems. One note before we start, and I will only say it once. This is history. Nothing in this episode is advice about money, and nothing here is a suggestion about what to do with yours. Let's go back to Cleveland. In September of 1855, a 16-year-old boy walked into a commission house on the Cleveland waterfront and asked for work. He had spent 6 weeks walking the same streets, going into the same offices, being told the same thing. On the 26th of September, a firm of produce merchants said yes. He kept that date for the rest of his life. Not his birthday, that one, the day he was allowed to start. What he did there was bookkeeping. Freight bills, ledger columns, the arithmetic of moving other people's goods, and this is the part that matters, the cost of moving them. A boy of 16, checking every haulage charge line by line, learning something that most of his future competitors would never learn at all, that in a business built on shipping a heavy liquid, the shipping is not a detail. The shipping is the business. 4 years later, he went out on his own with a partner. He put in about $1,000 of his own savings and borrowed roughly the same amount from his father at interest because his father charged him interest. They traded produce, grain, meat, salt. Then the war came and prices moved and the young firm did well out of it. And while it was doing well, something was happening 70 miles away in western Pennsylvania that would make everything he had learned about freight suddenly violently valuable. They had found oil, not a seep, not a trace, a well. And an entire region went insane. Picture what an oil rush actually looks like, because it is not what the paintings show you. It is mud. It is a valley where men are drilling holes 40 feet apart on land they have leased by the square yard, each one praying. The man next door hits nothing. And here is what happens when they all hit something. The price collapses. Every single time. A man who struck oil in the morning could be ruined by supper because his neighbor struck more of it. Drilling was a lottery. Everyone could see the money in the lottery. Almost nobody wanted the other end. The other end was refining, taking the black liquid and cooking it into kerosene, lamp oil, the thing people actually bought, in a world that was still lighting itself with whale oil and candles and going to bed when the sun went down. Refining was unglamorous. It was chemistry and barrels and fire risk and freight. Rockefeller went straight for it. In 1863, he and his partners put money into a refinery in Cleveland. 2 years later, when the partnership argued about how fast to expand, they settled it by auction between themselves. He bid $72,500 and took the refinery. Think about the position he had just chosen. The drillers upstream were fighting a price war they could not stop. Every one of them needed someone to buy their crude. And he had picked the one place in the chain where the chaos upstream was not a threat, it was a discount. To understand why that decision was so much better than it looks, you have to remember what he was actually selling and to whom. For almost all of human history, the working day ended when the light did. If you were wealthy, you could buy the evening back. With whale oil, which was expensive, or with good wax candles, which were expensive in a different way. If you were not wealthy, you went to bed. Kerosene changed that, and it changed it fast. A cheap, bright, reasonably steady lamp fuel meant an ordinary household could have 3 or 4 more useful hours a day. Reading after supper, sewing, schoolwork, a shop that stayed open. Whole habits of life that we now think of as simply normal are downstream of lamp oil becoming affordable. So the market Rockefeller stepped into was not a niche. It was every household in the industrialized world that had, up to that moment, been priced out of the evening. And it had a problem that nobody had solved: consistency. Refining was crude, competitive, and careless. Badly made lamp oil could contain too much of the volatile fractions, and a lamp filled with the wrong batch did not simply smoke, it could flash. There were deaths. There were newspaper stories about deaths. Buying lamp oil in the 1860s involved a small, real gamble every time, which is why the name mattered. Standard, the same every time. Now put the two halves together, because this is the shape of the whole business and almost nobody says it out loud. He was selling a product that was uniform, boring, cheap, consumed continuously, and required by nearly everyone. That is not a lottery ticket. That is a river. The drillers upstream were gambling. He had positioned himself at the one point in the chain where the money arrived in a steady, predictable stream. And predictable streams are exactly what let you make a promise to a railroad, which is what he did next. Now the trick. And I want to be precise about this because the myth is vaguer and less impressive than the fact. Cleveland in the 1860s was served by competing railroads. Railroads have a problem that is easy to miss. Their costs are almost entirely fixed. The track is already built. The locomotive is already bought. A half-empty train costs nearly the same to run as a full one. What a railroad wants, more than anything in the world, is volume. Steady, predictable, enormous volume. In 1868, the Lakeshore Railroad made Rockefeller's firm an offer. Guarantee us at least 60 carloads a day, every day, and we will cut your rate. The cut was about 1 cent a gallon, 42 cents a barrel, an effective discount of around 71%. Sit with that number. Not 7%, 71. His competitors were not being outsold. They were not being outthought on chemistry. They were paying on every single barrel a price for transport that he was not paying. And they often did not know by how much because the arrangement was not public. This is the whole engine in its first form. He did not need to be a better refiner than the man across the river. He needed to be big enough to promise a railroad something no small refiner could promise. And every barrel of discount made him bigger, which made his promise better, which earned him a deeper discount. A wheel that turns itself. Once it is turning, the only question left for everyone else is how long they can afford to keep standing next to it. Here is the obvious objection, and it is the right one to raise. If the rebate was the trick, why did nobody else simply do the same thing? Because you cannot ask for that deal until you are already large. The offer the railroad made was not, "You seem clever, here is a discount." It was, "Guarantee me 60 carloads a day, every day, in all weather, regardless of what the price of crude does this month. And if you miss, the arrangement is worthless to me." A refiner with 1 works and a good year could not make that promise. A refiner with 3 works and a bad quarter could not make it either. Volume was not the reward for the discount. Volume was the entry ticket. And this is where the wheel starts to turn on its own. Cheaper freight lowered his cost per gallon. A lower cost per gallon let him sell at a price that was uncomfortable for his competitors and still profitable for him. That won him volume. More volume made his guarantee to the railroads larger and safer, which earned a better rate, which lowered his cost again. Every turn made the next turn easier for him and harder for everyone else. Economists have a dry phrase for this: increasing returns to scale, and the dryness hides how brutal it is to live inside. His competitors were not being beaten by a better idea they could adopt next year. They were being beaten by a position, and the position was not for sale. There is one more piece, and it is the piece people underestimate. He knew his numbers. He had been auditing freight bills since he was 16. When Standard sat down to negotiate, it knew exactly what a barrel cost to make, to move, to store, to sell, to the third decimal place. Many of the men across the table were, honestly, guessing. That is the whole machine. Scale buys you transport buys you cost buys you scale, and precise knowledge of your own numbers tells you exactly how hard you can press without hurting yourself. Now watch what he does with it. In 1870, the partnership became a corporation, the Standard Oil Company of Ohio. Capital, $1 million. 10,000 shares. Of those 10,000, John D. Rockefeller held 2,067. The name was chosen deliberately, and it tells you what he thought he was selling. Kerosene in that era was dangerous. Badly refined lamp oil could flash and kill a family in their own kitchen. Standard was a promise about quality. Standard oil, consistent oil that behaves the same way tonight as it did last night. That is worth pausing on because the caricature of this man is a pirate, and the caricature is wrong in a way that matters. He was obsessive about the product. He was obsessive about waste. The company made its own barrels because bought barrels cost too much. It collected the residue that other refiners poured into the river and sold it. He read the ledgers personally for decades, hunting single-digit inefficiencies. The ruthlessness people remember was not instead of that discipline. It grew out of it. When you know your true cost per gallon to the third decimal place, and you know your competitor does not know his, you're not in the same conversation anymore. By this point, Standard was already the largest refiner in Cleveland, and Cleveland was about to stop having other refiners. 1872. The South Improvement Company. On paper, it was a shipping association. In substance, it was the most audacious thing anybody in American industry had attempted, and I want you to hear the second half of it, because the first half is ordinary and the second half is not. Half one. The railroads would give the members of this association rebates on the oil they shipped. Fine. That was already happening in private. Half two. The railroads would also pay the members a cut of the freight charged to everybody else. Not a discount on your own shipping, a payment to you out of your competitor's shipping bill. Read that again. Every barrel your rival sent to market would put money in your pocket. He would be funding the company that was trying to end him by the act of staying in business. The oil region found out. And the oil region, thousands of drillers, teamsters, small refiners, men who had already lost everything twice to price collapses, went to war, marches, boycotts, cut pipelines. The Pennsylvania legislature revoked the charter. Not a single barrel of oil ever moved under the arrangement. It failed completely. And in the weeks around that failure, more than 20 of Rockefeller's Cleveland competitors sold their refineries to Standard Oil. Some sold for a fair price and said so for the rest of their lives. Some sold believing the alternative was watching the value of their own works fall to nothing and never forgave him. The historical argument about which of those is the truer picture has been running for 150 years, and it is not settled tonight. But the outcome is not disputed. The scheme that never shipped a barrel handed him the city. I want to stay on those Cleveland sales for a moment because this is the exact point where honest people have disagreed for a century and a half, and I would rather show you the disagreement than pretend it away. One account goes like this. A refiner is shown the arrangement or hears enough of it. He understands that his freight costs are about to become impossible while the competitors become trivial. He is offered cash or stock in Standard Oil for works that is about to be worth very little. He takes it because the alternative is to watch it become worthless slowly. That is not a sale. That is a surrender with paperwork. The other account goes like this. Cleveland refining in 1872 was overbuilt and half of it was badly run. Many of these works were losing money before anyone had heard of the South Improvement Company. The offers were, in a number of cases, more than the businesses could have fetched from anybody else. Several sellers took Standard Oil stock instead of cash and became wealthy from it, and said so afterwards in public without being asked to. Both of those things are documented. Both of them are true of different men. What the record does not support is the comfortable version at either end. It does not support he simply bought failing companies at fair prices and the fuss was envy. It also does not support the idea that every seller was robbed. Some were ruined by it, some were made rich by it. A few were both, in that order or in the other. And here is why I am spending a whole minute on a 150-year-old argument about who felt what. Because the legal case that eventually broke this company did not turn on how the sellers felt. Courts do not run on resentment. It turned on structure, on rebates and drawbacks and control of transport, the things you can put in a ledger and hand to a judge. The human question and the legal question were never the same question. Remember that it is going to matter in about 15 minutes when we get to a courtroom in Missouri. What happened next was not a series of tricks, it was construction. Standard bought the pipelines, it built its own tank cars, so it was no longer at the mercy of anyone else's rolling stock. It bought timber and made barrels. It ran its own warehouses, its own distribution, its own tin plants for the cans that carried kerosene to the far end of the world. By 1880, the company controlled roughly 90% of American refining capacity. 90. And here is the thing modern people get wrong about that number, because we have been trained to hear monopoly and immediately think high prices. The price of kerosene fell during these years. It fell a great deal. Ordinary families who had gone to bed at dusk their whole lives could suddenly afford to light a room after dark. That is a real thing that happened to real people, and it is part of the story whether or not it is convenient. The case against Standard was never simply that it charged too much. The case was about what it did to the possibility of anyone else ever competing again, about a market where the price is low because one company decided it should be and could decide otherwise tomorrow. That distinction is exactly what the courts would spend the next 30 years trying to put into words. There was a legal problem. A corporation chartered in Ohio was not supposed to own corporations in other states, but Standard, by now, effectively controlled companies everywhere. The answer arrived on the 2nd of January, 1882. 41 investors signed an agreement. They handed the shares of 40 separate companies to 9 trustees who would hold and vote them all together. The shareholders got trust certificates in exchange. Nothing was technically owned across state lines. Everything was controlled from one room. The value pooled that day, $70 million. This is the invention of the trust as Americans came to mean the word, not a family arrangement, not a will, but a device for holding an entire industry in one set of hands while appearing, on paper, to be nothing at all. Sugar copied it, whiskey copied it, lead, cotton oil, tobacco. Within a decade, the word trust had stopped describing a legal instrument and started describing an enemy. And the men who signed that agreement had, without quite intending to, written the reason a Sherman Antitrust Act would exist 8 years later. By the end of the 1880s, the word had spread far beyond oil. Sugar was organized as a trust. Whiskey, lead, cotton oil, tobacco. In one industry after another, the same device was used to gather the whole field into one set of hands, while each company kept its own signboard on its own front door. And the country reacted. Farmers who sold into markets controlled by one buyer, small manufacturers who could no longer get a fair freight rate, state legislatures passing laws that stopped at their own borders and could therefore be walked around in an afternoon. In 1890, Congress passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. It is a strikingly short law for the amount of history it went on to make. It declared contracts and combinations in restraint of trade to be illegal, and it made monopolizing a crime. What it did not do was define what restraint of trade actually meant. That sounds like a technicality. It was the whole ballgame for the next 20 years. Because a law that says combinations in restraint of trade are illegal can be read two ways, and both readings are defensible in a courtroom. Read it strictly, and almost every large business arrangement in America is a crime, including ordinary ones. Nobody objects to. Read it loosely, and a lawyer who is good at structure can build anything he likes and simply argue that this particular restraint is a normal feature of commerce. For years, the second reading won more often than the first. The act was on the books. Standard Oil was, at that moment, still growing. A law is only as strong as the case that finally tests it. And the case that would test this one was still 15 years away, waiting, as it turned out, on a journalist who had not yet begun to write. The first real blow landed at home. On the 21st of March, 1892, the Supreme Court of Ohio ordered the Standard Oil Trust dissolved. Here is what that ought to have meant. The 9 trustees lose their grip. The 40 companies go their separate ways. Competition returns. Here is what it actually meant. The The trust was wound up, and the same men holding the same interests reassembled the same control under a different legal roof. New Jersey had quietly rewritten its corporation law to permit one company to hold shares in others. So in 1899, the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey took the shares of the other companies in the group and became the holding company for all of it. Different structure, same building, same 9 men or men very like them in the same room. This is the moment where the story stops being about oil and becomes about something you can still watch happening in your own lifetime. A court can order a shape to be dismantled. It is much harder for a court to order that the thing which made the shape useful should stop existing. Change the law, and the shape moves. It does not evaporate, which is why what finally hurt Standard Oil did not come from a courtroom at all. It came from a magazine. Ida Tarbell was a journalist who had grown up in the oil region. Her father worked in that world. She had watched as a child what happened to the men in that valley. Beginning in November 1902, McClure's magazine published her history of the Standard Oil Company. It ran in 19 installments, finishing in October 1904, and then as a book. It was not a rant. That is the reason it worked. It was documentation, court testimony, corporate records, the sworn statements of men who had sold out. She laid the rebates and the drawbacks in front of a mass readership in a form they could follow, and she made the machine legible. Understand what that did? For 30 years, the defense had effectively been, this is complicated commercial arrangement, and you do not understand it. After 1904, tens of thousands of ordinary readers understood it well enough to describe it at their own kitchen tables. Public feeling is not a legal instrument. It does not, by itself, dissolve anything. But prosecutors read magazines, juries read magazines, presidents read magazines. The federal government filed suit in 1906. November 1906. The Justice Department brought its case against the Standard Oil Company of New Jersey in the Federal Circuit Court for the Eastern District of Missouri. The trial ran for about 15 months. Think about what that means as a piece of work. 15 months of testimony in an era with no computers and no searchable records, clerks and lawyers reconstructing, from paper, how a combination of dozens of companies actually functioned, freight arrangements from decades earlier, purchase agreements with refiners who had sold out in the 1870s and were, by now, old men. The entire architecture that had been assembled quietly over 40 years, taken apart in public, one document at a time. On the 20th of November 1909, that court gave its answer. The combination was illegal, and it was to be dissolved. The written opinion followed in December. Standard Oil appealed, which was expected and entirely its right, and the case went up. I want to flag something here that is easy to lose in the drama. Nothing about this was fast. The rebate deal was 1868. The trust agreement was 1882. The Sherman Act was 1890. Tarbell finished in 1904. The suit was 1906. The decree, 1909. The appeal decided in 1911. 43 years from the mechanism to the remedy. If you have ever wondered why large concentrations of economic power feel so permanent while they are happening, that is why. Not because nobody objects, because objection moves at the speed of courts, and construction moves at the speed of a man who has already read the ledger and knows what he is doing. But it did arrive. The 15th of May, 1911. Standard Oil Company of New Jersey against the United States. 221 U.S. 1. The Supreme Court held that the combination violated the Sherman Act and ordered the parent company dissolved, its holdings in the subsidiary companies distributed away so that they would stand as separate businesses. More than 30 successor companies came out of it. I am going to be careful here and tell you something most narrators skip. Reference works do not agree on the exact number. 34 is the figure you will see most often. You will also find 33, 38, and 39 in perfectly respectable sources depending on what is being counted and at what moment. I am not going to pick one and say it in a confident voice so that this episode sounds tidier than the record is. More than 30, most commonly given as 34. The court affirmed the lower court's decree with modifications, and the final decree was entered on its mandate that July. The ruling did something else too, that outlived the company. The court said that not every combination is unlawful. Only unreasonable restraint of trade is. the rule of reason, which means that for over a century afterwards, every American antitrust fight has been an argument about that word. Reasonable. So, the government won. The largest industrial combination on earth was ordered cut into pieces. 40 years of political fury, finally an answer. And now, the part I promised you at the start? At the time of the dissolution, John D. Rockefeller held 244,500 shares out of 983,383, roughly a quarter of the whole thing. When the parent was broken up, he did not lose that quarter. He received instead roughly a quarter of each of the successor companies. His holding was not confiscated, it was subdivided. And then the market did something the court had not planned for. Inside the combination, an investor was buying one enormous, politically hated, legally besieged company whose future was a question mark in every newspaper. After the breakup, an investor could buy Standard Oil of California, or Standard Oil of Indiana, or Standard Oil of New Jersey. Real, separately valued businesses in a country whose demand for oil was about to be transformed by a machine that barely mattered in 1911 and would define the century, the automobile. The share prices of the successor companies rose, many of them dramatically. The man who owned a quarter of all of them got richer from the breakup than he had been under the trust. The remedy did not dismantle his fortune. It repriced it upward. Sit with that for a second, because it is the most useful thing in this entire episode. A court can end a structure. Ending a structure is not the same as ending the wealth the structure created. Those are two different problems, and in 1911, the American state solved exactly one of them. The second half of his life is the half people skip, and skipping it gives you a cartoon. He had been giving money away since he was a clerk, earning almost nothing, out of religious conviction, in amounts he recorded in a ledger like everything else. As the fortune grew, so did the scale of it, and the method changed. He moved from giving to individuals toward building institutions that would outlast him. In 1890, his money founded the University of Chicago. In 1901, the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, an American laboratory for basic medical science at a time when the country had very little of it. In 1903, the General Education Board. In 1913, the Rockefeller Foundation was chartered. Those institutions funded public health campaigns, medical schools, agricultural research. Some of that work saved a very large number of lives, and the people whose lives were saved never knew whose ledger it came from. Does that settle the account? I am not going to tell you it does, and I am not going to tell you it does not. The rebates were real, the drawbacks were real, the laboratories were real too. Both columns are in the book, and you are an adult, and you can hold two true things at once. He died on the 23rd of May, 1937, at 97 years old, 26 years after the court took his company apart. So where did the pieces go? Standard Oil of New Jersey and Standard Oil of New York spent the century growing and eventually became the company we now call ExxonMobil. Standard Oil of California became Chevron, Standard Oil of Indiana became Amoco, and Standard Oil of Ohio. The original, the one incorporated in 1870 with $1 million of capital, ended up inside BP. Continental Oil became Conoco. The court cut the machine into more than 30 parts, and over the following century, the parts grew and merged and grew again. Several of them are now among the largest enterprises on the planet. Which brings us back to where we started. That pump you drove past. That logo, redrawn 4 times. You're not looking at Standard Oil. That company is gone. The court's order was real and it was carried out. But the shape it drew, refine, control the transport, integrate everything, know your true cost better than anyone else knows theirs, did not die in 1911. It got copied. It is being copied right now in industries that have nothing to do with oil by people who have never read a word about Cleveland in 1870. That is why this story is not an antique. The commodity changes. The mechanism is patient. If you take one thing from tonight, take this. The interesting question about a great fortune is almost never, how did he get so much? It is, what did he understand about the system that everyone else was standing inside and not seeing? For Rockefeller, it was freight. Everyone could see the oil. He was looking at the trains. Next time on Empire Builders, a man who came out of a Scottish weaving town with nothing at all, built the largest steel operation in the world, sold it for a sum that made him the richest man alive, and then spent the rest of his life systematically trying to give every dollar of it away before he died. He very nearly succeeded. Andrew Carnegie. Steel, scale, and the strange, unfinished argument he had with his own money. If this was worth your time, follow the channel, because that one is coming. Thank you for listening.